So you're in California.
Yeah, I live officially I live in Alameda, but it's basically the Bay Area. It's just
All
like
right.
Oakland, like where it's a little island right off of Oakland, basically, like an old port town or something like that.
Nice.
Yeah, it's really nice. In fact, I'm I'm appreciating because I'm super sensitive to kind of the I don't know, lack of soul, like track houses and shopping malls and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff, man. It just all that stuff just makes me sick and nauseous, like
Yeah.
physically. So we found a place that's like right in a really old neighborhood, like historical houses, and they have
Nice.
lawns because they're houses that, I think most new housing developments are so strange. It's like they build the houses to look like houses.
Yeah.
Built
That's
the
such
neighborhood
a good way to say it.
to look like a
They're like
neighborhood.
simulations, house simulations, simulacra.
Yeah, totally, totally. So well, welcome.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you could come on. I've been looking forward
Yeah.
to it.
Sorry it took so long to get it all together. I've had my life has been crazy for the past year and a half. And so it's only just in the past few months that I feel like I said, okay, I know that there's a bunch of people that said they wanted to talk to me. I need to kind of get back to them. And so I just remembered, I remember Guy Sengstock had written me a few messages that kind of flew over my head. So yeah, I'm happy it worked out.
Yeah, me too. Me too. The yeah, I've been noticing you've been having more conversations lately with people.
I
Has
think
that been intentional or?
it is intentional. It's hard to totally understand why. It's kind of an intuitive thing that I'm doing. I don't completely understand it. I think it has something to do with Jordan Peterson kind of reappearing in on the horizon, but at the same time not appearing on the horizon, kind of being there but not being there. And I don't know if it seems like that's maybe what's motivating this in my, but I don't know. It's hard to explain it. It's just this intuitive thing that I all of a sudden had a sense that, okay, I need to also, I think what it is that I think that in the past maybe year and a half, I've been consolidating the people that have been following what I'm doing, trying to be more in contact with the people that understand, that are wanting to develop it, and not trying to reach out and have communications that'll challenge me. And so I think that that's it. I think that seeing Jordan kind of reappear on the horizon has made me think, okay, I need to not just focus on my thing. I need to really push myself so that I don't stagnate in this space. So I
Right.
said, who's the hardest person that I could talk to, like the person that would be the most challenging. And so I found these kind of more hardline atheists to talk to, just
Right.
because I feel like it's the most challenging thing. So
Good, totally got. I really appreciate that sense. Like there's something about that I really relate to, and it actually brings to something I wanted to ask you about, which is like your role, right, in all of this. Because for me, this has been, I totally relate to what you're saying. You basically said, I'm like, oh, you've been talking to more people. Is that intentional? And you're like, yes, but it's hard to say why.
yeah, well, we work so much with intuition. I mean, so much of
Yeah.
what we do is intuitive, and so I try not to stop the intuition too much when it's happening.
Yeah. Well, specifically, what's so interesting about this, because it's so conversational, obviously, is, and I think this has been the case for me. I mean, anything that's been good in my life has been some sense in which I've been intuitively responding to something. Something speaks to me, right? And so I just kind of find myself following it because I'm really bad. Personally, I'm really bad at paying attention to anything that's not interesting to me. Like I just,
Oh man,
oh, right,
I'm so much the same. You
right,
know, I oh yeah, I've been, I luckily I'm married to a woman, like a wonderful woman in that case, but I've always like I've never done anything which was going to make me secure in the world. We both of us, we've always just done what we knew what the right thing was, or the thing that really
yeah,
was kind of shining in front of us, that we
yeah,
take a grasp of, no matter where it led us. And so
yeah,
it's better to live that way. It's riskier, but It's way more fulfilling.
Oh, totally. Well, and then as you follow it, then the thing that you've been interested in kind of comes out, and then I mean that's what circling was for me. And circling was the same thing. I'm just like, whoa, there's a moment. Like me and my friend noticed it, and we're like, what is that? And then 10 years later, there's a movement and a language trail and a methodology, and people. It's funny because people kind of ask me questions about it, like. And I guess I can talk about it as if in retrospect, as if I knew what I was looking at. But actually I didn't know what I was looking at. But it didn't surprise me as it started to come into fruition. It's like there was a connection between Guy, that moment of where something shined out to me, and then the response to it. And then as it's in retrospect, I can pin it all together on some level. But the connection between the guy that's after it's revealed and the guy before it's revealed, like how the hell does it know? Like what are we actually responding to? That's always been the mystery to me.
Yeah.
Of how do we know?
I think you're right. I agree. Yeah. I think that's the one thing, 4 years ago when I just started making these YouTube videos, it was the same, all of a sudden I was kind of put into a situation and kind of thrust into a space that I had not planned for, that I had not thought that I would ever be in. And, but that was it. Like that was the path in front of me. And I thought, okay, let's do this, and not knowing exactly what the plan was. But then, as you said, as you start to move, then things start to clarify, and then you can start to understand, okay, so this is where I'm going, this is what I'm doing. And then you can fine tune, what you're doing. But I feel like now is a moment again, where I feel like there's something else, like there's something else kind of calling. And so we'll see. I don't know where it's going to lead me, but it's okay. It's all good.
I just love the way, the matter of fact said the thing that you said, like the way that you said that. I'm like, have you been doing it intentionally? Yeah. I don't know exactly why.
But it's hard to explain this to people, like people who don't live that way, because for example, like I started icon carving. I would have thought you could be a professional icon carver, because that doesn't exist. Like it's a job that doesn't exist. No one does it.
Yeah.
And so then I started doing it professionally. And I remember someone asked me about what I was doing and said, oh, I can't wait to see your work in 5 years. And I looked at him and I said, 5 years? Like, I'm not sure I'll still be doing this in 5 years. And they didn't understand how I could think that way. But it's like, I don't know what I'll be doing in 5 years. And it's totally fine with me. I have no problem in imagining that I'll be completely somewhere else. And if I'm in the same place and it's still kind of, it's bringing life to the around me and it's bringing life in my own experience, then I'll stay here. That's fine.
Right. There was a guy that you interviewed that wrote a book called, is it Redemption? The guy, he's a historian.
Dominion?
What's that?
Dominion?
Tom
Holland?
Yeah. I watched the interview, which I really liked, and I got the book, and I've been listening to the book actually, which is really good.
But he's a great writer. He's such a good writer.
Really is. Man, I always kind of, I've been getting to know to what degree how I've always had a sense that we're so deeply Christian, right? In ways that whether or not we go to church or even believe in God or anything, you almost can't be Western without being Christian, right? At such a deep level. But he exemplifies it really clearly in a way that I'm like, whoa, it's so deep in the difference. And it's interesting because I've actually been thinking about what it must have been to be Christ, right? Where what's taken for granted at this point, right? Of our conscience, the way our conscience speaks to us, the fact that I feel bad if I treat somebody in a lower status meanly, or I see somebody else do it, and it's just obvious that we shouldn't do that, and we feel bad about all the different pre-reflective responses to the world that seem so self-evident or something, that a lot of that stuff was not there. And so I'm just imagining, what the hell was it like to be Christ, to hear yourself saying these things where there was no basis upon which for it to be even remotely intelligible? Imagine yourself saying, Yeah, like if they hit you, turn the other cheek. Like, how the hell is he even supposed to know what that means, right?
Yeah, I think I see it the way that I would phrase it is more like to meet him. Like I struggle to imagine. I think that it when you read the scripture, you get a sense that that Christ knew exactly what he was doing compared to most people. But
Right.
I think that the way that I would experience the dilemma is more to say, like, if I had met Christ, 2000 years ago, I think most of us would not have recognized what was happening. I think we would have been as dumbfounded as most people around, and
Yeah.
maybe we might have been some of the people that thought that he should die, because what he was doing was just like,
Yeah.
what is going on? What is happening? It looks like you're going to take over, like you're going to take over politically, but then you keep talking about loving your enemy and all these weird things that it's just
Yeah.
very odd. And so I really do think I have, it's weird because I have sympathy, like I have a lot of sympathy for the Pharisees when I read scripture, because
Sure.
everybody thinks they would have been one of the disciples, let's say, and they wouldn't have been like the Pharisees. But
Statistically, you wouldn't have been,
oh
right?
man, you probably definitely would have been like the Pharisee. Not only that, but even the disciples sometimes didn't know what Christ was doing. They're kind of like, okay, so he said that now? Like
Yeah.
what is that? I thought he said this before, so what's going on?
Right.
And they look confused all through Christ's life until until Pentecost. And then at Pentecost, it seems like everything kind of, it's like they finally see, okay, we've been doing this thing for several years, and now, okay, this is what it's about. Like, this is what it's supposed to be. And
Yeah.
then there's this scene where Peter stands up finally and like speaks to the thousands of people and has this, like, this convincing, and it's because he finally got it after, more than 3 years, like what exactly was going on. That's pretty crazy to think about that.
Right. Totally. Like, so just to put yourself in Christ's position, where like because I'm wondering if it's something similar than what we're talking about. It's like, well, like, what are you doing? Are you saying that intentionally? Are you doing these interviews intentionally? Like, well, yeah, like it is intentional. Like, I'm not sure why, right? This kind of whatever that position is, it's something similar where it's like it's not predicated on something that's completely revealed and clear in some mental way, but there's an intuitive sense and a response to something that's very, very deep that you trust.
Mm.
And I'm wondering if that's a little bit, I don't know, just putting myself in the story as I've been thinking about this. I don't really know that much about Christ's life. But like,
Well, the thing about Christ is that, especially the way Christians understand it, is that he did have that knowledge. He wasn't like us, kind of fumbling around, because you can see that there are certain scenes in scripture that are there to show you that he knew exactly what he was doing. Like he would quote certain verses from scripture, like he would open up the Torah and then he would read certain verses to help people understand what was going on. And he was trying to, and then when others didn't understand, he would tell them. It's like, you fools, like you don't know, you don't even see what's happening. Like you have it in front of you and you don't see it. And so sometimes Christ is actually pretty harsh on the disciples because they're more like us. They're more like fumbling along and trying to kind of get a sense. Whereas he seemed to have had a kind of clarity that is difficult to,
right.
that's difficult to frame, let's say.
Did he have a basis? Did he ever reference or give any sense of the basis upon which his clarity was about?
Yeah. Well, that he was God. You mean besides that?
Yeah.
Besides that he was the Son of Man, that he was all these images of the manifestation of God in the world. Like, that's probably the best places where he kind of shows the clarity. But
yeah. Okay.
the fact that he encompasses, like, for example, like there's one place where people ask him, like, what's the law? Like, and he says, love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And I mean, that's to show you how much he understood, because there's hundreds of laws in scripture, and that law is not even in the like 10 commandments. But he says, he takes this little law I don't know if it's in Leviticus, or he takes this little law and he says, this is the fullness of the law. And so you can see that he's actually he's taking all the prescriptions and transforming them into modes of being, into the highest mode of being.
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, I mean, he knew exactly what he was doing. Like he knew exactly what he was saying. It was,
So I'm just
he
trying
was
to put
transferred.
myself in that position, imagining like, so at what point did he start to, unless it was instant, unless he knew it like in the womb, like when did he know that he was who he was? Do you know? Does he?
It doesn't say in scripture, but there are many stories, like legends of Christ, that he, the idea that he was performing miracles even as a child. There's the verse, there's the place in scripture where he's in the temple at 12 years old and he's teaching all the elders. And so Mary forgets Christ in the temple. They go to visit the temple, and then they think that he's with another family, so they leave, and then they just leave Jesus there for like a whole day until the next day. And then when they come back, they find Jesus sitting there in the temple and teaching all the elders of Israel. And then she says, what do you like? I can't believe it. We forgot you. Why didn't you come with us? And she's a little bit of annoyed with him. And he answers, he says, no, I'm doing the work of my Father. And so that, I think that text is there to show us that even at a very young age, he knew what he was, and he knew what his role was. Yeah. So but there's stories in all kinds of,
just a knowingness. Hearing that,
what do you mean?
If I were to say that, I'd be like, oh yeah, it's from your Father, right? It sounds like there's just a deep knowingness.
Yeah, but there are a lot of stories like that in other cultures as well. Stories of the child that speaks when they're born. The child that's born full grown. You get that in the Tao, for example, the idea that Lao Tzu was born full grown, and you get it. There's a lot of different traditions about children that are born full grown, and I think that all those traditions are there to talk about the capacity that there are beings that are manifesting something so fully that they do it from birth. And I think that's for sure, that's how Christians understand Christ, as being the full incarnation of the Father, and that this was not something that developed in him, but was really was there at the outset.
Right. I don't know if I've ever quite thought about it. I mean, I have been thinking about this, but like now in this conversation, I find myself imagining from within Christ at some point starting to know, or maybe just the moment I'm aware is the moment how would I know that? And what would it be like to know that? Like, how, God, that just sounds so intense. Just imagine that you're like going along and then you just find yourself knowing that you're God.
I think that I try not to think of that way, because the thing about knowing is that when the things it's not like you find yourself knowing, in the sense that it's not an accidental thing. Once you know something, it's a form of clarity. It's not a once it happens, like to you. Let's say you could take the moments. You take the moments that you've had moments of clarity, let's say, where all of a sudden everything kind of lines up into place, and all of a sudden exactly, it's as if you're kind of one with your outside and one with your inside, and you know exactly what you're doing, and you know exactly why you're doing it. It's like everything's lined up. And I think most people have these little moments like that, like say these little moments. And I think that if you want to imagine Christ, it's to imagine that that's all he is. That his whole existence is that clarity, which it can't really imagine it, but you can expand it out of your little moments of clarity, let's say.
Right. I know that for me, in those moments of like in that clarity, it's usually, I usually don't represent those moments until someone kind of asks me about it. Right. And then when I go to try to describe what I may be clear about, I'll have this experience of like having a difficult time putting it into words. But you're right, there's something that I know that I can't account for. So I would imagine it's like, but then imagining living your whole life from that place. That's amazing.
Yeah, and it seems like if you follow the tradition, it seems like it's possible. Like if you look at saints who live their whole life in prayer and take up an ascetic life and really kind of sacrifice everything to live in that clarity and that prayer, in that self denial of the passions, and also embrace of love towards their neighbor, then you meet characters in the tradition that have that. Like there are these images, these stories of Saint Seraphim of Sarov, who's a recent saint, who's a modern saint, and he lived in the forest with a bear, and like he just, all of it was just this almost mythological figure. But one day, one of his disciples was talking to him, like someone who was trying to get some teaching from him, and he kind of asked, I forget what he asked him. He asked him something like, I'd like to have a glimpse of what it can be, like what life can be, what we can reach. And then Saint Seraphim looked at him, and then before his very eyes, Saint Seraphim became like a flame, like a living flame. And he saw like who Saint Seraphim really was. He saw this being that was completely burning, in God. And then it was just for a split second, and then it was gone. Like it was just like I saw through the veil, let's say, for a moment. And so it seems like those characters exist even today. Like on Mount Athos, there are all these stories of contemporary elders who do things that we can't, that people don't believe are possible. Like they have all these powers or whatever, and they commune in spirit together, so that these monks who lives in caves, who don't talk to each other, will nonetheless speak to each other in spirit. And they can tell someone, remind so and so about this thing that he told me yesterday, and they're like, wait, you didn't see him yesterday, but he did, in this kind of in this higher sphere, let's say. Yeah. It's funny, I never talk about this kind of stuff. You got me on a weird space.
Is this the kind of stuff you talk about with your brother?
I mean, it's the kind of stuff that I don't talk about, especially what I just said now, because it's the kind of thing which I think is secondary to what is most important. But because it looks kind of magical, that it attracts attention, and so I think it can sometimes take people astray, because they like the idea of people having powers and people having more. And so it's almost like a science fiction version. So, and I think it's totally possible. I don't deny these things, but I don't think that they're that important.
Yeah, totally. Well, they're kind of neat. Well, I think what I'm getting from this conversation is, like, as you're talking about it, I mean, there's just it's neato to get inside of it a bit, right? And like get the mystery of it, like of just this sense that on some level, I'm sure Christ had a subjectivity, right? He had an experience he was having, right? But he had a knowing in which, what's really interesting to think about is how does he even represent that to himself when he pictures what he is? If I'm God, when he thinks of himself as God, I mean, by definition, he probably doesn't have a picture, right, in his mind, right? Like these are ways of kind of maybe getting at the mystery of it, right? Or getting close to it. That's what I'm experiencing as we're talking.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think that those are usually not the avenues that I go on in terms of trying to understand this stuff, just because the best, because it's hard to imagine what a higher form of consciousness is, unless you experience it. And so it can become a bit arbitrary to try to, and so the only way for me to try to understand it is to compare, let's say, the moments of focus and of clarity and of love that I have in my life compared to the moments where I'm just a zombie sleepwalking through my existence. And so it's like if I can compare those two types of modes of experience, then that's when I can say, oh, okay, so maybe there's something like that, but higher up, like there's even more. And I can, that's the only way that I can kind of imagine the moreness of it. But I don't see it as a, I think that's the only way that I can really kind of peek into that mystery.
Well, you mentioned something. I usually don't like to come at it like this, or it's rare. because it has a tendency to have people think like something fantastical, like, and that's not the best way of going about it, which is an awareness of that there is a listening. I would imagine that seems to presuppose a listening that you speak into, or an awareness of people, which I think starts to get into some of just the questions I had about your role so far in terms of, being on YouTube and talking about symbolism. Like, I'm just curious about what is your, like, what is the
my role
you have, right? Like, who are you talking to? Like, what have you found out so far?
Yeah. Well, look, I think that if I have a role, I think that I kind of fell into it, and that, which is fine, which is totally fine. I think that I couldn't have planned for it, but it seems like what I'm doing is I'm offering a ladder to people who have been living in a kind of materialist, reductionist world, and need the few lower steps to reach up and then kind of have a fuller, more, let's say, enchanted vision of reality. And so it seems like that's what I've been doing, and I have ways of talking to people that will awaken that intuition. And so I try to constantly look for, so if I have like you said, my main strategy, which is, it is a strategy, is I always try to surprise people with meaning. And so, which is why I'll when I talk about a subject, I'll try to find an extremely high subject, which is, let's say, like some Bible story or some medieval architecture or something that is very high, and then I'll find an example which is as low as possible, like how you experience your coffee cup, or how or some Marvel movie, or some kind of low thing, in order to jolt people's to jolt people into an experience. It's like a mini, I always say I try to create mini Zen koans, like little mini ones, where people go, oh, okay, wait a minute, I hadn't thought about that, and then all of a sudden it connects two wires in their experience, and then they have a little spark. So I would say, like, if I do that, then I'm happy. Like, that's pretty much what I would like to be doing.
Right. So to have people take those couple of steps where they can get an intuitive glimpse of another world that the current step that they're on, like, won't allow them to see, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good way to understand it. Yeah, that's a good way to understand it. So I think that's really been, if I can kind of reduce what I'm doing to one thing, I would say that's it. And I think one of the other things I'm trying to do is to reinvigorate Christians who are blasé, or think that this is just rote. Like, they don't see how much power is in the story, how much power is in the ritual, how much power is in, and so to kind of get people excited a little bit again about about the story of Christ, about the stories in Scripture. And so I would say that maybe that's the second thing I'm trying to do.
Yeah. Okay. So the other thing is that there's a whole world of people who go to church, but there's a little bit of that they're not awake necessarily to the livingness of the story. And you want to, like, in some sense, do something similar with them, where they can become awake to the tradition that they're actually inside of.
Yeah, and it also seems to be most of the people watching my videos seem to be young people, like late 20s. Some people that are like either mid 20s to early 30s, people who are either in college or just finished college and have had to kind of deal with all that intellectual pressure that you go through when you go to university, especially if you go in a liberal arts world. And it's like they're looking also for ways to explain or to give strength to something that they might feel intuitively. And so they have an intuition about something, but then they don't necessarily have the tools to fully expound it. And so I think people are grateful to have those tools. I think that's one of the things Jordan Peterson did too, is that he was giving ways of, and John Vervaeke has been amazing for that, where he gives you words and tools that you can say, you can talk about combinatorial explosion, because all of a sudden you have a term, and then you can explain the term, but once you've explained it to someone, they understand what it is. And so then you can kind of move on, and then you can talk about relevance realizations. Like, that's an awesome term to help people kind of step into something that they maybe they don't have access to.
Like
so I think I'm doing something similar, but with images and analogies, helping people see the patterns that they haven't seen yet.
Totally. Well, you know, I think I had an experience. I'm not sure if I got your role. I thought I said to my wife in this moment, right, that I was like, oh, I think I'm really getting Jonathan's role here. But I think
what do
I
you think it is?
gotten symbolism too. I'm not sure, but like maybe both are the same. That's kind of a cool position to be in, right? Where they get symbolism is getting your role. That's kind of a cool place, I would imagine, being you. But there was a moment actually where you know, a lot of the apocalypse started happening, but I wasn't quite getting it totally. It all just started, it still looked like the same thing to me. And then I was watching one night, I think it may have been a day, or I was just finding out about the guy that the cop that killed the person on TV, right?
Yeah.
And somewhere around there, and then there are 3 hurricanes, and then like 20 riots or something like that, and the plague, right? All happening at once. I was watching the news, and something about, for some reason, the news just reached out and it hit me. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. No, we're actually, this is a different, it felt like time itself had changed, right? Like this is we're in a different temporality. Like is how I would put it. But I wasn't left, the insight didn't leave me with any sense of orientation, right? I was like, everything that I could grab onto to try to understand it didn't quite hold. And then a few days later, I was watching your videos, and I think it was the first video or two after that where you actually came out and talked about the actual event. And you talked about that you took your time with it, right? Because it took something to really understand it. But especially when you explained the phenomena of all of us watching, right, this man get killed, right, and that you explained the phenomena of how we were identified with the cop, we were identified with the person being killed, and the catharsis, and all the symbolism that you put around it, and you explicitly said like, "Hey, sorry guys," and this is, and you also talked about the fall of the West in the burning of the statues, and you gave that great explanation. I love this explanation. It's like you move into a house and there's still the past family still has their pictures up. You're like, no, you're going to want to take them down. It was like, it's like, that's so true. And you said, hey guys, listen, I'm sorry, I don't have any solutions. All I can do is kind of articulate what I think is maybe happening. But there was this way where that I felt like after that, I found myself in a place inside of it. And I was like, I felt myself being able to grip onto something that was a bit ecstatic and very, very orienting. And I remember I was like, oh shit, like this is, I looked at my wife, Brianna, I was like, I think this is his role. Whatever it is he's doing, I think he just did it.
Oh, well, good. Thank you. Well, I'm happy that I kind of helped you get some clarity in the strange moment. It's been this year. The thing about what's happening is that time is really accelerating. And so the shifts let's say the shifts that you felt, this kind of temporal shift or this shift of worlds, like as if the ground is moving underneath you, is usually something that would happen like every few hundred years, but now it's happening every few years.
Right.
And so, I felt it happen in 2016, I felt it happen. And now I'm feeling it happen. And so it's like 4 years is a short time for the world to change so much in terms of the whole ground kind of shifting underneath you. For people who are intuitive, it's very, very existentially difficult because you feel it. Like you really, it's like it stops you from sleeping, and you feel it, that you feel like the world is changing, and it's almost like it's it's like you're tied to a giant gear and it's like stretching you, And so I understand what you're saying, and so I feel it very much so.
Yeah.
And so I also try to, so hopefully if we can at least help people feel the despair which goes with that, or at least if people understand what's going on, then even though you can't stop it, you don't feel just falling. Like you don't feel like you're just falling. Like at least there seems to be some frame around what's happening for you to understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's also a very interesting thing in itself of like if I don't have a frame around what's happening, if there's no place for me to kind of get a handle on something, like what I get a handle on may just actually what I got a handle on is that there is no handle, right? Maybe that's the thing that I got my handle on, but there is this element of, and I don't know where I stand in a lot in this whole issue, because I really feel the same thing that you're talking about, of where I'm like, whoa, like there's like existential changes that are happening at such a level, right? That used to take thousands of years to happen. And they're just boom, 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 happening closer and closer. Like, and for me, there's really this element of like, well, I'm on a ride here. I don't know exactly what I'm riding, right? But like, I'm on a ride, and when I hear people respond to like, right, what like, what did you just?
Yeah, oh man, I know, but the thing is that this ride has been going for a while. Like the ride has been lasting a few centuries. Now, the thing we don't realize is that the ride slowed down after, the tens and tens and tens of millions of people that were slaughtered in World War II. So because World War II ended in such a mass carnage and two nuclear explosions, then it's as if the ride slowed down for 1-2 generations. But that's it. It's starting up again. It's the same ride that brought the world into the revolutions after the Enlightenment. And so it's only we just were fortunate to be in a pause, after mass slaughter. But so it's not pretty. What's on the horizon is not. I'm smiling as I say it. I always laugh in the worst moments, but it's not pretty. Yeah.
Well, I think. Sorry. Well, the laughter actually is. I mean, there's something in the laughter that I think is revealing about what we're facing. I'm not exactly sure why. This is what I was just trying to get at. I haven't been able to quite put my finger on it. Because when I see people talk about the world and the time in a way that's like has a sense of urgency, and it's good natured, of trying to, it's like almost like trying to take existence and turn it into a problem to solve, right? I appreciate the impulse, but I just get this sense I'm like, we're inside of something. Like it seems like a huge category mistake. You know what I'm saying? Like the history.
Exactly. That's such a great way to put it. It seems like there's a category error going on here. Pretty big one. Like you think you're going to solve existence? Okay, that's a little bit of a problem. No, I totally agree with you. And you can see the arrogance of arrogance of the systems of mass control and of mass information. Like they really do believe that they're going to get there. Like they believe that they're moving in that direction. And so it's a Tower of Babel moment. It really is. And that story also doesn't end well,
Right. And there's something for me about those handles that I think I would put it like this. I think it's maybe, I mean, we could use Heidegger's help here, because there's the quality of truth. There's a truthness of like that sense where he talks about it's not correct, right? It's not correct. It's also correct, but there's an element of that, that which was concealed is revealed, right? There's the truthness or the happeningness of truth, which has a kind of transcendence to it. Like even if what gets revealed is that you're in hell and you're going to be in hell for the next 20, whatever, right? There is something that laughs, and there's a stasis there, which I think has to do with, I don't know, is it have to do with just having a semblance of being in truth.
Yeah. Well,
and there's this,
there is this, like, I think you're right in the sense that the disclosure itself, like this capacity to kind of get a sense, to see the pattern, to get a sense of what's happening, even if what is happening is horrible. It does offer you a kind of a small little ecstasy, or a small little mystical experience, and a sense of freedom within it too. You know, it's because you all of a sudden you pull back and you see it come together, right? You have this revelation. And Christ talks about how all must be revealed, and it seems like Christ inaugurated this process where things would just be revealed one after the other, and the revelation is not positive. I think that it's always like a mix of both. So there are aspects of this disclosure of the world which is positive, and there's an aspect of it which is a scandal. And so as let's say Christianity revealed the highest mystery of theosis, of the purpose of creation, of as becoming one with God, it's like also what is going to be revealed is all our perversity, all our passions in their in their worst forms of desire to control, of a desire to live only for pleasure, all of this stuff that is now rampant in our society. It's kind of like those two had to happen. It's like it had to happen. It has to show itself.
Yeah. So the showing, right? Well, it's those little ecstasies that kind of give a sense of freedom. I think also I think this starts to get into some of my questions about symbolism, right? So when I first started watching you, there was a sense in which I was familiar with the language that you spoke. I was familiar with what you were talking about because I had obsessively read Jung when I was in high school, and so I was very familiar with the way he talked about like symbolism, right, in the Jungian way that he did. But but there was something different about the way you were talking about it, right, than he was.
And because I on the other hand don't read Jung.
Yeah,
which people don't seem to believe me, but it's just true. I don't know what to say.
I don't think you'd like him. No, like I don't really know. I think you'd find it really. I think you would if you read Jung. I'm imagining like if you read Jung, it's like it'd be interesting, but I don't think it would really be compelling. Because he has some implicit horizons that I think are, well, what makes your work to me and not Jung's is actually when it came to this, right? And I think this starts to speak to these moments of ecstasy, these moments of releasement, right? And I want to talk about what's good about that, right? When you said, no, it's like, I think it's when you talked about the symbol, I think you were looking, it's some video where you were talking about the symbol of something. And you said, look, the symbol is actually, the symbol is one of the ways, or that picture is one of the ways that the pattern substantiates itself, right? The picture isn't the symbol, right? The picture, it just happened. I got this sense, so you didn't say this, but I got this sense it's like it's a condensed, it brought all the pieces enough in a small enough space-time, right, picture such that you could see the whole pattern in front of you, but it itself is just an instantiation in the pattern that happens in reality over longer time frames, that if you could understand it, you could see those patterns.
That's a good way to understand it. That is that the symbols that appear to us most clearly are those that are the most condensed, you could say, like you said, that the word symbol actually means two things that are thrown together. And so there's this idea that symbolism itself is a bringing together of elements, and so that you see them as one, you see the pattern or the ordering of it. And so the symbols, the more proper symbols, let's say like an icon or, a church building or something, which we tend to think as symbolic rather than, your everyday life, which is also symbolic. But let's say the liturgical space or the sacred spaces, they condense it in a manner which is more accessible, or makes it accessible to us. So we can kind of get it. And once you see the pattern, then it actually then, if you're sensitive, then it'll start to let's say bleed out into other aspects of your reality. And then you realize that, hey, my body is also made that way, and my relationship with others also has similar patterns, and our societies and our stories, all of it is actually manifesting these sacred patterns to a certain extent.
Yeah. And so the symbol is one instant of the pattern, right?
It's like a little incarnation of an essence
yeah. And so then that's when I really got, it's like, oh, you're actually talking about reality.
Oh, yeah. That might be the difference between me and Jung. Right?
Yeah.
It's not just psychological.
Yeah.
And so it really is, the psychological is part of it. For sure, your psyche also has that shape. And it's really important because we are human beings, our logos, let's say we have reason, and we have consciousness. Therefore, we are the place where symbolism actually kind of happens, but it's nonetheless is also happening in the world, because we're like the funnel through which the world has meaning. And this is something which I'm not making up. Like, this is something that I take from the Church Fathers, especially St. Maximus the Confessor, this idea that the man is the ultimate microcosm, and that the entire cosmos condenses into the human person. And we can understand it we can use cog sci to now to understand it, or can use theory of meaning and the problem of emanation and complexity to now see that, yes, conscious beings are like the funnel through which this potentiality that's out there, this kind of indefinite potentiality, comes in and then becomes meaning, becomes a world.
Right. Okay. So I want to slow down there a little bit. So the you just said a bunch right there. So
sorry.
The infinite potential, or the endless potential, comes in, and what you're saying is that the psyche, you could say, is the place the psyche is the place where that potential gathers into a world.
I mean, it's not just the psyche; it's the person. It's more embodied than just the psyche. But it is the person, like the human person, both in terms of mind, but also in terms of acting out in the world. That's why it's a perspective, And Jordan talks about this all the time, where the categories of being are actually categories of action. They're not static categories. The way that Plato tended to think of forms. There's something off about that. St. Maximus the Confessor talks about how the idea of things, or the form, and the essence, the way that the Platonists talked about, are actually also the end of things. Those two things together. And so he kind of takes a lot of Aristotelian categories and Platonic, jams them into this thing, which is logos, which is, it's also the reason, the purpose, and that brings it into the human, back into the human person, because those purposes come out of us, or join in us, And so the reason why we have a category called rock is a human reason, but it's also totally objective. It's not a subjective reason. It's objective, but it's a human reason. It joins into us. Right. I don't know if that makes sense.
That makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. Like, it makes a whole lot of sense to me. It's really cool. It's just really, it's so cool. It's so there's something about it so constituting. Like, I get this sense of, as we're talking about it, like the sense of it is, it's like we're talking about what constitutes, and everything's constituted in some level, right? The constituents of something that feels like, and this is one of the things I've always really, this is what philosophy is really, I think specifically like Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty, and I didn't quite exactly understand why the hell I started reading those guys, right? At or my early 20s, because I didn't understand anything that I was reading, but but there's something that was being shown.
Yeah, especially Heidegger.
Right?
There's some passages in Heidegger which I'm sure he doesn't even understand. Like, I'm
Oh,
pretty sure.
exactly.
Yeah, but there are some passages in Heidegger that are pure gold. Like, he definitely had an intuition about
Right.
this, the way the world shows itself to us, and I think that he opens a door towards, even though in a way he was not a, he was almost like, he was very much a modernist, and he was very much trying to deal with some of the problems of materialism and all of this. But I think that he opens a door which can then take us out of it. And so I really, that's why I use Heidegger. I use him implicitly. I do quote him sometimes explicitly, but there is a Heidegger program running in my mind as well. I have a few programs running, and that's one of them for sure. It's Heidegger.
Yeah, totally. Well, it's like and there's a very like when you talk about symbolism, right, in the patterns, the way it lays itself out, right, in the logos, right, the gathering, laying, right, the thing that kind of this sense of the, I mean, that's one thing for me too, is just kind of really getting that. No, it's like anything, any perception that you have is a perception to the degree that it's intelligible to you, right? And to the degree it's intelligible, it means that it's gathered in its intelligibility, and what you experience actually is its intelligibility and its being are the same thing, right?
That's right. And
Right.
that's really the key. And the fact that you get that is so important. So few people get there. And I was talking to some atheists recently, and like they mentioned Don Hoffman, for example, and you can see it's, everybody has that problem, which is that even though they start to perceive the necessity of something like consciousness or the necessity of intelligences, they always still want to posit like some world out there, that another world, like some other world that's out there, that's not the one that we're having the experience of. And it's like, how can you posit that? And like, because you're still there, like you're still, it's like a weird thing where you have to self-deny, and so it's almost like there's a falseness to that. And so I think it's much better. I think the phenomenological perspective is much better, because it says this is it. Like, this is there is no other world besides the world that we encounter. And we can make abstractions, and we can create abstract constructions out of it. Things like science, things like, the solar system or atoms and all of this stuff. But it still happens within the frame of our immediate, of this Dasein, right? Of this care that you perceive, that you things lay themselves out and appear to you because you care about them, and you can't avoid it. And it is relevance realization. It's like, you can't avoid that.
Yeah. And that's the thing of it. It is really all the way down. I like how Heidegger like gets at that. Like, being in the world is you're not a being that then cares. Like, the fact that you're a being is already you are a concernfulness, right? That's how it's that care that gathers the facts to show up in the particular, and as you do science and all that kind of stuff is all downstream from, right, this primordial kind of sense of care. With that thing, that kind of that sense of really getting symbolism, when did that happen for you?
Yeah, it's a strange thing. Because it's not just me, it's my brother and I both at the same time. We
wondering about that.
I would say that in our 20s, we were both kind of on different paths. He was studying math and computer science, and I was studying art. We're close, like a year and a half away from each other, so we've always been very close.
Are you younger?
And sorry?
Are you younger or older?
I'm older. Yeah, I'm a year and a half older than he is. And so I started reading postmodern philosophers. I was reading Jacques Derrida, and I was reading Baudrillard. I was reading, just the whole crew. Roland Barthes wrote a little book called Mythologies, which really had a big impact on me.
Just really quick. So what had you actually read those? what was it, part of art school, or like what had you?
It was art school that kind of pushed
Yeah.
me in that direction, because I took a few philosophies of art classes, and so they were having us read these authors.
I went to
But
this
it's like once,
dude, so I'm familiar with art school. I moved to San Francisco to go to art school.
yeah, and so that's when I learned about Heidegger and I learned about Jacques Derrida, and then that took me on a road of my own, and that's when I started reading Baudrillard and Roland Barthes. And I remember Roland Barthes had a little book called Mythologies,
Mm-hmm.
where he was trying to show the mythological patterns in different social manifestations.
Mm-hmm.
And he was doing it as a way to mock them, like not as a way to mock them, but as a way to try to deconstruct them. But I remember reading those books and thinking, this is awesome.
Right.
Like it's all like, I didn't see it as something like a Marxist desire to destroy these patterns. I thought this is awesome. And I remember reading Portrait of an Artist and being really hit by Joyce's use of pattern. And so I was in the modern world.
Right.
And so then I became interested in trying to create symbolic languages. And when I was in art school, I became pretty much obsessed with Anselm Kiefer, who's a German artist who does these kind of he uses imagery and he creates kind of symbolic references within he uses kind of this intertextual language within his paintings and stuff, referencing mythological characters and all of that. And so I was kind of trying to do it on my own, and it just wasn't working out. And at the same time, my brother was reading, discovering rabbinic literature. So when he was 16, he decided to learn Hebrew on his own, and then started reading, rabbinic literature and mystical Judaism. And so we kind of had discussions, and because we would just talk every day for hours and hours and hours, and we kind of created even this like weird hermetic language that if you would listen to a conversation of ours, you just wouldn't understand what we were talking about. And then both of us, he discovered this author first, an author. His name is René Guénon. He's a French traditionalist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when he read Guénon, my brother said, you have to read this. Like this is what we've been looking for years. Like we've been looking for this forever. And so when I read Guénon, it really reshaped my thinking. There's a lot of problems with that author, like serious problems. That's why I don't quote him too much, because he has a lot of remainder of occultism in his work, and there's a lot of weird associations he's had. But nonetheless, his insight into symbolism was just beyond anything I'd ever seen. So he wrote a book called what is it? It's because I have it in French. The Symbols of Sacred Science. He wrote a book called The Great Triad. He had several books where he worked out these symbolic patterns, and then so I kind of was trained that way. And then I started to read the Church Fathers and saw that no, it's all there in Christianity. It's all there in the Fathers, in Saint Gregory of Nyssa. And I found the Fathers that really I felt had that intuition. Right. And all that led me to become Orthodox.
Maximus, right? It's going to be Maximus and father of
Saint Gregory of Nyssa, Saint Ephraim the Syrian.
All the
those are really
Platonic ones,
my guys. Right?
Yeah, all the Neoplatonic. I just started reading Saint Maximus, the Cosmic.
Cosmic Mystery.
Yeah, just started.
Yeah, it's a nice little book because they've chosen the text, and so they kind of chose the right. They really chose the right text. Some of those are just blow you away. Some of these because they're so short, and he just kind of says things, and it just gets you. Yeah.
He does something. It seems like Saint Maximus he's at least when I think at least the way it occurs to me, like when I look at just all the stuff, like St. Maximus like stands out with something. I don't know exactly what it is, but there's something he gets or a way he says it or a place he's standing that just seems to be fundamental. Yeah. Is that your experience with him or what's?
I think that he offers up gold and you have to be careful because he does it in very succinct way. And so you have to be careful because you can miss it. And so you have to read his little text, like his little ambiguous or you have to just kind of take your time and then read every sentence of that of that text and just kind of slow down, because he's not going to start blabbing. He's really going to give it to you in these very powerful images. And so he's definitely, I mean, once you've read St. Maximus and you've kind of understood what he talks about, then a lot of, and I think it's easier to know that the things I'm talking about, I'm not taking it out of my own imagination. It's like, I will take St. Maximus and I will definitely apply some of the patterns to things that he didn't apply. Like, I'll interpret things that he didn't interpret, but the main thrust of his vision of this union of heaven and earth, and all of this, and then St. Ephrem, especially, like the mountain, all of these things I take from these fathers. So
interesting. So you were so basically, like, you were in art school, right? And then you started getting assigned these books and you started cracking them open, and you're like, this is you're reading their symbology and their distinctions, right? Now, before that, was your, like, did you have much of an intellectual life before that? Like, what was your relationship to all this stuff before? Well,
I mean, my father was a very intelligent, thoughtful person. And so in our house, curiosity and discussion was encouraged. And we definitely always saw, both my brother and I always saw my father as a very intelligent and thoughtful person. And I have several memories of my father piercing through the appearances, like where he sees things happening, and then, and then he says something to us, and I can see that he kind of sees through the veils, and so I think that there's definitely a legacy coming from him in terms of a desire to kind of to go further and to see through the appearances, you could say. But it's definitely in university, like most people, it's university that really kind of forces you to deal with this stuff, because they kind of, it's a really high, really intense moment of thought and of discussion and of of exploration. You have time to read, you don't have a lot of worries in life, and so it really is a good time for that.
Must have been just an amazing time. Like, with your,
it was existentially difficult, though, because it was it was this crisis, because I grew up in an evangelical world, and so it was a crisis for me, because I couldn't reconcile what I was discovering and the powerful imagery and the powerful patterns I was discovering. I was struggling to reconcile it with my surrounding. And so,
you mean at art school, or
I mean just through art school, and then later discovering these symbolic thinkers, even in art school. Like, while I was in art school, I was writing and directing these plays in the kind of evangelical world. And so these huge, like, massive productions with like 30 people, and there was music, and so I was directing ththese plays. The last play I wrote, man, it is like, I'm surprised to even put it on, because it was really, I was taking all of this stuff that I was dealing with. It was about the bronze serpent and the idea of, like, casting down idols, but building idols. And it was about an architect whose buildings fall down. And so you had this massive sandbox on the stage, and then you would have this person build up these things, and they would always fall. And so it was like this whole, like, trying to deal with the problem of postmodernism. It's like, I can't believe they even put it on, but nonetheless they did. And so you could feel, like, in that play that I was struggling, that I was, like, just struggling to kind of to fit it all together, because I was being ripped apart in a way. And it's really the discovery of orthodoxy and just the traditional church fathers, which were finally a reconciliation for me, because I think that without that, I probably at some point might have stopped being a Christian, because it's like I always loved Christ. I knew that I belonged to Christ, but then I looked around me and I felt like what I was seeing was extremely superficial.
Right. And what were the things that you were kind of seeing? Was it like the event, like, how is evangelistic Christianity different than Orthodox or things that involved it, like the older church fathers? Like, is that kind of what started to rip apart, or part of what?
Yeah, for sure. Because there's something arbitrary about the way that scripture is presented. And it has to do with, at least it's not all these churches, they're just the ones I grew up in. And it didn't help that, like, I'll blame my father. It didn't help that my father was really smart and was actually questioning and always trying to pierce through. And so at the same time, being in a situation where people would talk about the Bible as if it's like this. And it's also because they were so scientific and materialist minded. And so then they would talk about scripture as if they're describing a car, and it's like, here are the parts, and this is how it works, right? It's like, okay, so Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, they did something bad, and so in order to solve that problem, then God, sent Jesus to die in their place, and it's like a 2 + 2 = 4, and then because of that, now if you believe in that, then you go to heaven when you die, and it's like, that really is not enough. Like, it's just not enough. Right. It's just not. I'm sorry, it's just not. Yeah. And so when I started to see, when I started to see that the pattern of Genesis is the same as the pattern of Moses crossing the Red Sea. And it's like, but then no one around me wanted to acknowledge that, because they felt like if they acknowledged that, they were somehow damaging the authenticity, the material authenticity of the story. It's as if I can show that there's a pattern in the story, then I am somehow saying that it's just a story, right? That it's not actually something that happened, because things that happen in the world don't have patterns, which is obviously not true. Yeah. But it's weird, because I think that we're in a different space now, even than when I converted to Orthodoxy. So, for example, like, there's an amazing group of guys called the Bible Project, and they're doing these videos on the Bible, and it's like, there's full. They all of a sudden they have these perceptions of all these patterns and this the way that the text is constructed, everything. And I'm thinking, okay, I think we might be in a different space now than what I was, let's say, 20 years ago when I converted.
Right. I really appreciate what you said about, like, it was actually the postmodernists that really opened all this up, right, in a big way, right? And also I also appreciated what you said about your dad. I mean, actually, my dad has something in him like that. But, like, some of the best moments with my dad are actually moments where he said something that was just piercing and revealing of something, right? Like, those are actually, now that you say, I haven't really thought about it that precisely before, but now that I think about it, some of the best moments with my dad were always ones where he'd say something that, like, where he would reduce the entire universe of my experience down to a bumper sticker that it kind of opened it up again or something, right?
Like an aphorism that would contain it, something like that. Yeah.
I remember, and there's a certain sense in which, I think actually it's funny, I never really thought about it with my dad, but like that there's something about those moments that I think taught me to listen in some way. It in some way, I can feel that it kind of in my body as I'm talking about this kind of just open, like, that you can do that with you can take your own experience, right? And, like, you can somehow see all of reality in your whole experience in a way that has you relate differently to your experience. You can listen that way. Like, I think my dad had these, so I think I sympathetically appreciate what you said about your dad, right?
I mean, we're very fortunate, I think, and, like, in my family really fostered also just the capacity to do the thing that you're going to do, and that was something that was really important in my family. So my youngest brother was actually a professional skateboarder for several years.
He was.
He lived in California. Yeah, he lived in Long Beach, did that whole thing for several years, and then Mathieu, who is more kind of a mathematician type and developed his symbolic thinking, almost like a pure science. And then I am more the artist. My vision, my approach to symbolism is more lyrical and kind of messier than my brother, because Mathieu shoots like arrows. All his chapters are like 3 pages, right? And they're like, sorry?
He's the one that wrote the book, right? about
He
language.
wrote yes, the language of creation. Yeah.
That one goes right to it. That
Yeah,
will
man,
take,
I could never write a book like that,
yeah,
because he just shoots. Like, I tell people, go slow, because it's a kind of like reading Sam Maximus, where
yeah.
it's like there's no mincing of words in there. There's nothing extra. Even the footnotes, like I tell people, the best stuff's in the footnotes. They're there for a reason. Don't miss them.
So when you were going through so there was the part where it was incredible when you were in college, right? So it's like the logos is opening up in this completely different way. But then it was opening up to a degree where you couldn't make sense of like your current experience and your past experience without it feeling threatened, right? In some way.
It was hard to join all of it together. And also
Yeah.
because I was an artist, and I was I grew up in a Baptist church, which, although not openly hostile to visual art, is at least, let's say, implicitly hostile to visual art. And so it just wasn't working. It just wasn't fitting together. And so and I feel like, yeah, I'm happy of how things happened and how things kind of brought me to where I am.
And then the crisis part of it, like, was that when you did it start to resolve when you found it in the church fathers, as you were talking about?
Yeah, definitely. Oh yeah.
When
I read, like when I read Saint Irenaeus, for example, and it's like Saint Irenaeus is really back there. I mean, he's one of the early fathers, and Saint Irenaeus has a very powerful symbolic understanding. The thing is that it's hard because his writing, he just drops these things in his writings. You can't, it's not like when people ask me like, where in Saint Irenaeus, I'm like, I don't remember, because it's not like he's written about it. It just kind of, all of a sudden you're reading Adversus Heresies, and then like this thing drops, like this massive knowledge drops. And so when I read early fathers like Saint Irenaeus and even St. Clement of Rome, for example, I thought, okay, man, there's something missing. This is there. It was all there. And then it kind of went away. And I got very, very excited. Like, I was really excited to read the church fathers. I was devouring, like St. Gregory. When I read Life of Moses, I was just, I was like, where has this been all my life? This is so amazing.
Wow. So I want to just kind of get that, because I think I kind of got it a little bit, but so it's like there's the way where the patterns actually had everything like erupt. It's like ecstatic on one level, but then kind of also questions everything. And then you found, and it was after art school that you found.
Yeah, it was after.
Right.
Yeah. And the positive thing about growing up in a Protestant church, like a really positive thing, is that the fact that they really focus on the Bible means that the stuff. So it's like I had the stories were stored in my memory. Like, I knew the Bible stories. Like, I knew the scripture. I knew what Christ said. I knew what St. Paul said. Yeah. And so, but it was there in almost like a latent form. And then all of a sudden, when I started to see the patterns, then it was like, it was as if someone opened up the curtain to my past experience and then just connected it all together. Whoa, right? Because as if it's almost like you're watching a movie that has a surprise ending. You're watching the movie and you're kind of like, okay, this is okay. I get it. And then all of a sudden they show you something that reveals the whole thing from the beginning. And so that was my experience. It was like, because I had it all there. It's not like I was learning new things. It was just connecting things that I already knew. And so to me, that was probably the most intense, like, let's say, the most intense moments of kind of ecstasy, were these moments where all of a sudden, something I'd known since I was 8 years old, all of a sudden just kind of smashed together. And then it shines, like it becomes bright. I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah, I totally get it. Totally get it. It's funny, like when you said about the latent, right? It's like back there are stories that, like, in the back of your hand, they're just part of the background, and then you're looking and everything's like ripping apart, but it's luminous, but yet it's threatening, and then and then all of a sudden you look back, and then your own history, it's, God, that's so interesting. Like your own floor reveals itself to you, but it's like, it's not new.
Yeah, 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 you're right.
That's
It's
really
not new
amazing.
information.
Amazing. That's really amazing to hear, to imagine.
Yeah, it's funny. You got me like talking about myself so much. I'm not used to doing that. Like it's I feel like I'm giving my testimony here.
Oh,
It's becoming a little embarrassing.
that was okay. Yeah, yeah. It's just where my curiosities go, because I can always feel in your videos. It's like look, like the only reason that you're talking about all this stuff is because it's part of your experience, right? Like, and I just have always had these questions about, like, in what ways are part of your experience? You've mentioned a few of these things, right? So it's just these things I've been curious about, right? Because I know that
Yeah.
for me, it's like these kinds of, my life is defined by these, my own version of these kinds of things where it's like,
Mm.
right? Like moments where I'm in hell and it all looks like it's going to go over. And then something happens and then it connects to everything else. And then like your whole history makes sense. And
Mm.
like it's through, it's funny. And actually it, part of it for me, and I've always had I don't know if I've been able to communicate this. I haven't been satisfied with the way I've been able to communicate this. How when you read something, right? When you read Heidegger, right? So you read a text that's like, you sense that something's there, you sense it, like, but it's just beyond what you know. And then there's the act of reading it, right? Which is, and I think this has something to do with my learning disability, and I'm dyslexic and stuff like that, but that there's a way of getting into this information, if you want to call it information or knowledge, right? And that if you practice reading it, that you look up from the book and then you start to see it somehow. Like, it's what I felt like with Heidegger. Without knowing it, Heidegger was teaching me how to see.
Yeah.
Right? That's what it
Yeah,
was.
especially Heidegger, like of all people. It's as if
Yeah.
to understand Heidegger, you have to enact it. It's not just it. You can't just be like a mental understanding,
Right.
And I think that also Matsier's book, that's how he wanted to write it. It's like he wanted to write it in a way that this is going to make sense when you apply it, not when you're reading it. It has to find body. And I agree. I think that's especially someone like Heidegger. It's like you really have to. You lift your eyes up, and all of a sudden, it's changed you, and you don't totally understand why, or how.
Yeah. Like, yeah, for me, it was, I mean, I really didn't have any idea, because what was happening is right at the time that like circling started to happen, right? Was the same time when I started reading. A friend of mine had a book on Heidegger and it started talking about being, and I'm like, and I just, at first it just glowed, and so I just followed it. And at the time we lived in San Francisco. I lived in San Francisco. I was right down the hill from the Art Institute, and they had Barnes and Nobles across the street. And I was a poor student, so I'd go in there. No one bought the Heidegger books, right? So I'd go in there and I would just like have the whole library to myself, and I'd go in there, drink coffee, and read Being in Time, and have no idea what I had just read. I remember I think I was reading Being in Time for 2 months before I knew what Dasein actually meant. All right. So, but but I didn't really know what the connection was between that and circling until two and a half years later, right? When, because I would read and then I go circle on the beach and in our courses and all these different ways that we do that, right? And I go back and forth, and then at some point I overheard the style of the language that came out of all of that as it started to become like a thing, which I have mixed feelings about its thingliness. But like when he started talking about, getting your world, a world, and background and foreground, and I started to notice that it started to make its way into the lingo of the practice. And then I heard it, other people talk about it, and I was like, oh, wait a minute. This is the same. This is Heideggerian speak. And I'm like, oh, very funny, right? This this kind of, so there's something about a little bit of what you're talking about that's familiar to me, right?
Mm.
Like it gets you at a level that you don't necessarily understand at the time that you're learning what you're learning, right? Until it becomes manifest in your perception somehow, or in the way that your experience lays itself out to you and shows itself to you.
Yeah. No, that
It
makes
sounds
total
like that
sense.
really happened in a big way, and that was actually the way that you stepped into the orthodox path, right?
No, definitely.
Yeah.
I think it happened a little bit. It happened a bit before that I even found orthodoxy, because at first I was sad because I was like, oh, here it is in the fathers, here it is, but then it's gone, like it's nowhere. The same with the art. Like when I discovered medieval art and the how patterned it was, and just how it was this amazing intertextual, algebra of language, and I thought, wow, this is amazing, but it's gone. Like it's all gone now. And it's in reading and discovering the Orthodox Church and realizing that it was all still alive in the Orthodox Church is one of the things that made me say, okay, well, this is it. Like because to be an iconographer, to kind of dive into the language of iconography, you could do it in an archaeological way, but then that's not the point, right? If we're talking about these ways of embodying and these ways of existing in the world, that if I'm going to study an ancient language like an archaeologist, and I'm alienating myself constantly, but I wanted to be in the language. And so I had to kind of find a path where I could do that. And that's what it is. Like the icons I make are made for people, for churches. They're not idiosyncratic objects. They're objects that actually exist in people's lives to foster their spiritual practice, or to celebrate something. So, yeah.
That's great. Wow, that must have been something to kind of realize. And was that synonymous when, like, were you already carving iconography when you joined into? No, this is
No,
after you went.
it kind of came together where I started attending an Orthodox church when I was looking to paint icons.
Hmm.
The carving icons is almost accidental, because I wanted to paint icons, because everybody who becomes Orthodox wants to paint icons, because that's what is the main tradition. But I couldn't find a teacher, and I was very eager. Like I was really eager to do it. And so I ended up, my parents cut down a tree in their yard, and they had this wood. It was like a linden tree. So they said, oh, this linden wood we hear is good for carving. Would you like some pieces to kind of fiddle around with it? And so then I was like, yeah. And I said, I want to carve a cross. Like I want to carve a blessing cross. So I kind of carved this thing with like X-Acto knives. I didn't have any tools. I took forever to and it's horrible. I still have it.
Right.
It was really bad. But I really enjoyed it. And so it was almost like it was obviously not accidental, but it was not what I would have imagined that I would carve icons. It just kind of presented itself to me, and then I did it, and I continued, and there you go. And here we are.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's great. It's great to get to know you. Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. I feel like you got to know me, but I didn't get to know you very much. So
yeah, we could do we could do another one.
Yeah, that'd be nice. I'd like to, because I don't totally understand what the circling thing is, because I hear circling, but I don't know what it is, and I don't totally understand it.
Yeah. Well, I can just give you this short version of it.
Go for it.
Well, I'm still finding out what it is. For me, that's my experience of it, right? But circling is, and I think it's helpful to understand that I feel and I didn't understand this until kind of probably about 8-10 years into it. I started to get like, oh, okay, what is this responding to? I think it's directly in response to that. It's only been, I think it first started with the answering machine, but really got big, with texting, right? And all these different social media things where we were able to separate. It became like you were able to consistently separate like the basic exchange of interaction that you used to always have to do in person or on the phone, right?
Yeah.
Right. and those interactions are basically how you learn. That's how you become a self, is through those
Yeah.
social interactions, right?
Yeah.
It's only been, I don't know, 15 years or so since you've introduced a division where you don't have to do most of them, right?
Hmm.
And because they're filled with so much ambiguity and so much discomfort, that it's also the same thing. I think the same thing happened with our bodies, right? With Industrial Revolution, machines brought everything to a small circle in front of us. So to function, you
Yeah.
didn't have to move anymore. And then we got fat, right? And then you had this whole different transformation of what even a body was. And now you have gyms and these ways of trying to somewhat deal with that, right? Which has been transformative. I think the same thing's happening with relationship. And I'm realizing, like, part of why circling has gotten so big is because it happens to be it's basically a yoga that just basically takes whatever it is at the most basic level. If you're to take the asanas of all of the impactful personal conversations that have been like life-changing or deep or intimate, that have been nourishing, right? If you're just to basically take the elements of that and make them kind of postures, if you will, circling is just basically getting together in groups and taking those postures of listening, of speaking, of communicating, that invite those moments. And it took me a while to realize that I think a lot of why it's gotten so big and people have responded to it is because basically it's very much like a gym with our bodies is a response, right, to that we don't move anymore. So we have to go into an environment in order to move. I think something similar is happening with circling. So it's a practice. And of course, the practice, when people start doing it, they start having really, really, really deep spiritual kinds of experiences, really moments where they wake up and stuff. But it's a yoga for relationship and intimacy, I would say.
Okay.
And then
I'll have to definitely look into it then.
Yeah.
I don't think I've heard it. I've seen you talk about it, and I've heard John Vervaeke mention it and stuff, but I haven't had the time to kind of look into it.
Yeah. And then John's frame with it is like, it's essential. He sees it as kind of an essential in his terminology, the ecology of practices that he talks about. Yeah. Which
right. I didn't realize we talked for like an hour and a half. I never do that. You got me really in a good space, I guess. Yeah. So I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I really appreciate it too. Let's do it again sometime.
So, let's stay in touch. All right. It's good to talk to you. Bye-bye.
Right. Bye.
As you've noticed in the past few weeks, I have been having broader conversations, trying to stretch out my thinking, trying to test it, trying to see where it sticks, where I'm having trouble to communicate. And so if you have some ideas of the type of people you would like to watch me talk to, and you would be interested in seeing the exchange, please write them in the comment section. I will be paying attention to that and seeing what interests people and what kind of discussion we can have if it's someone that I can access and would be willing to come to talk to me. And as you might have guessed, we are not necessarily in the good graces of the YouTube algorithm, and so please share these conversations if you feel they are useful. I have a lot planned for 2021, which will probably be as crazy or more so than 2020. And so hopefully we'll be there to talk about it and to try to make sense of what is going on. And so thanks for your attention, and I'll talk to everybody very soon.